Before we get started on this exercise, make sure you've begun the layout for your campus fire safety report. You should have already completed laying out the fire statistic pages and added the buttons and interactivity for all of these first 4 pages, as well as your first main page. Also, before we begin, download the Building Safety folder, and inside of that folder you're going to find another text file that has all of the information for these 4 pages, as well as a set of different symbols and icons. And also, within your project resources, locate the floor plan exercise JPEG. If your floor plan looks slightly different from mine, that's totally okay because every group has something different, but the process for laying this out and creating this floor plan should be the same regardless if yours looks different. So to get started, I'm going to close out InDesign and we're going to jump into Adobe Illustrator. We're going to create a new document by going up to File and down to New. The size of our document needs to be 8 inches by 8 inches square. So make sure you have 8 by 8. You're working in inches. We only need 1 artboard, and that doesn't have to have any kind of bleed to it. And as far as the advanced options go, we can keep it at RGB or CMYK. When we say create, this will give us our artboard to work on. The next thing we need to do is to place our floor plan JPEG. So let's go up to File and down to Place and locate that floor plan JPEG. I've got mine on the desktop. Right there. We'll say Place and click once to place it inside the center of our document for here. If necessary, you can click on the edges and hold down Shift to drag it down and scale it. Now, we're going to need to make 2 copies of this. So with this one selected, hold down the Option key, click and drag, and make another copy, and for now we'll place that one off the outer side of our artboard. We'll come back to that later once it's needed. The first thing we're going to do with this version is make a 3-dimensional isometric drawing of the black lines representing the floor plan of our building. So with the object selected, the quickest way to do this is to choose the image trace at the very top. And by default, of course, this is going to look for the light and dark areas. And in the past, we've noted that this looks for fill colors within this area. We want to set this to recognize the lines and to draw off lines instead of fill. So to do this, click on the Fill or Image Trace options. This will bring up our Image Trace dialog box. Under the Advanced Settings, and you may have to click on that to open it up, uncheck Fills and select Strokes. This will tell you to look at everything on the computer and turn it from a fill color to a stroke color. We're still keeping it black and white, which means we'll lose some of our inside lines, but that's okay for what we're doing. Also, we won't have to ignore white. It'll automatically do that since there's no fill color set for this one. You may, however, need to increase your threshold. If it's too small, it may not pick up on some of the details. So make sure your threshold is over 100 and it should be working okay. Once you're finished, we can close out Image Trace, and let's click on Expand to expand our object. The next thing we need to do is to clean up our lines. If we go up to our stroke panel, set the stroke to be 4 points wide, click on the word stroke to open up the More options, and make sure the cap is set to be square, as well as the corners set to be square. With that set, we can now turn this into a nice 3-dimensional isometric drawing. To do this, with our lines selected, let's go over to our Swatches panel and set the stroke color to be a medium gray. There doesn't need to be any fill color for now. With everything turned gray, we'll go up to Effect, down to 3D, and choose Extrude and Bevel. With the Extrude and Bevel options panel open, we'll zoom in to see this, make sure Preview is turned on, and you can see it automatically starts to turn this into a 3-dimensional building. The other thing we need to do is change the position from off x-axis front to isometric top. This will rotate it directly into place, and now I can see it as if I'm looking on the top of the building. As far as the extrude depth goes, let's bring it down to be about 30 points tall. Once you're finished, you can say OK. Then we need to expand our object that we created to turn it into the regular vector objects. Let's go back up to Object, down to Expand Appearance. This has now broken it into the individual parts that we have. With this one done, we can now shift over to our copy of our image, and let's do a three-dimensional line for the blue to indicate the escape route within our building. Now in order to do this, we actually have to draw off each of the lines. So I'm going to use my line segment tool located at the top of our toolbox. Let's set our line color to be something noticeable for now. So I'm going to choose a dark red, and I'm going to set it to be relatively thick, about 5 or 6 points. With that done, I can click and drag over my lines and redraw them and recreate them as necessary from here. Remember, you can hold down the space bar if you need to reposition it. Also, holding down the Shift key will allow you to give yourself a straight line or a line that's automatically horizontal or vertical and doesn't go off to the side at an angle. Holding down Shift, click and drag. Oops, let's make sure it's got the same size to it. And then finally, let's do the line segment for this last little line right here. Copy all of the lines that are blue. The next thing we want to do is to have a circular point for each of the inside parts, and we want to have an arrowhead pointing on the outside away from the building. So to do that, let's take this one line segment at a time. I'm going to choose this one at the very bottom. In this case, I want to have a circular part be right here at the end of my line. To add a circular part, let's open up our stroke panel. I'll drag it off here. If you don't see all of the options for your stroke panel, you may need to click on the arrows until they all open up. And what we want to see are the arrowheads down here at the bottom. Illustrator has a variety of different predefined arrowheads, but if we scroll down, it's also got some other shapes as well. We want to choose the circular part of the arrowhead. Notice that when I click on it, it automatically adds it right here to the end, and it may be way too big. So let's scale this one down a bit. About 50% works really well for this particular line. Also, we can have it aligned at the very end of it by clicking this option, and that'll place it centered towards the end of the line. Let's do the same for some of this other inside edges. Select this line, go in, choose the arrowhead, and scroll down till you get the circular part, and then scale it down to be about 50%. And finally, add it to the end of the arrow tip. We'll go back up to this one, do the same thing, choose the arrowhead, make sure you got the circle, scale it down to 50%, and add it to the end of that one. Zooming back out, the last thing that remains is to add the arrowheads at the end of each of our line segments. If I was to choose this top one at the very top, I'll click on it. Again, returning to our arrowhead, let's move this up to the top so we can see both it and the arrows. You can choose any of the other arrows that you wish, but I like this nice squared off arrowhead. Now, if you add it accidentally to the wrong end of your line, you can very quickly and easily swap it up to the other end by clicking on this swap arrow right here, and it'll swap it to the other end of this side. As with the other ones, we want to scale it down just a bit to be about 50%, and then add it to the end of our line so that it goes out beyond our working area. Let's add an arrowhead, in this case to the very end of both of these, since they're going out to this side. Selecting the line, in this case we'll add 2 arrowheads, one at the very end of here, and also another one at the end of this one here. Scale both of them down to be 50%, and then set both of them to be outside of that particular edge. Whoops, I do see that I've missed this one right here, so let's select that one really quick and add a circle to the end of it and scale it down. Once you've finished with all of the line segments from here, we can close out our stroke panel, and then we can delete away our background image, leaving us just with our lines. We want to set these lines to be the same kind of perspective that our inside building is. So selecting all of your lines, let's group them together, go up to Object and Group. Then we'll go back to Object and choose Apply Extrude and Bevel. Now by default, this is going to set it to have your lines being off and up off your page, to be extruded into the third dimension. We want to have them nice and flat. So in order to change their appearance, let's open up our Appearance panel, go into Window, and Appearance. Click on the word 3D Extrude and Bevel. This will bring up the options from here. We'll turn on Preview, and let's set our depth to be 1 point. When you click away, now you can see you got a nice, relatively flat area. We can say OK to this, and this will be our guidelines that we can place inside of our building to showcase the exit plan for it once we start to put it into our interactive report. The last thing we want to do for this artwork is to export it as a PNG file. So I'm going to select my lines. Let's go up to Object and expand their appearance so that flattens them out. With the lines selected, to save them, we're going to go to File, down to Export Selection. Notice that with Export Selection, only the assets that we had selected, in this case the lines, are what's checked on. And we're going to save this to our desktop. So make sure to choose the folder, and you have your desktop selected. We'll say Choose. We'll put everything into a subfolder. The format for this, let's choose the scale to be 3x, so 3 times the size, bigger than is necessary. The format will be set to PNG 8, and it'll have no suffix and no prefix. We'll then choose Export Asset, and this will create a subfolder called 3x that'll have our little asset inside of it. Once it's created, let's select the name of it and rename it Escape Route. We can return to Illustrator. Now let's select our building. Highlight this, go up to File, down to Export Selection. As with the other one, only what's selected is checked on. It remembers that we're saving it to the desktop in its own subfolder. The format will be 3x, no suffix, with a PNG of 8, and no prefix. Choose Export Asset, and this will place it in that 3x folder. And let's rename this. Instead of Asset number 3, we'll call this the Building PNG. Both of these are what we'll use inside of our layout and design for our interactive PDF for the next part of this exercise.